Well, howdy there, folks. James, Political Friar, coming to you again. I got the University of Oregon hat on, and so we're going to have a politics discussion on this one. Not so much the horse race or the candidates or the campaign, but actually a little bit of comparative politics, a little bit of political science or political theory. And that's because Joe Biden, in his sort of parting shot, has proposed a constitutional amendment. How about that? We haven't had one of those for a long, long time. I think the 90s was the last time that we had a constitutional amendment come up. There are every once in a while attempts to revive the Equal Rights Act. But Joe Biden says that we should pass a constitutional amendment surrounding the Supreme Court, add a few lines to Article 3. And his reforms have two major components. There's a number of components, but the two big ones are first, a term limit for Supreme Court justices. He suggests that Supreme Court justices should serve for 18 years, one 18-year term, and then should be replaced. And this works out in that there are 9 Supreme Court justices. And so if you staggered their terms the same way the Senate staggers their terms, you would end up having a new Supreme Court justice every 2 years. And that has some attractiveness to folks when they're designing a government. It means that you're going to end up with a little bit of turnover instead of having a long serving justice who maybe loses touch with the realities of their duties over time. It also would probably keep some of the geriatric Supreme Court justices, from giving their opinions in their old age, which you can say is an advantage or a disadvantage, but it is an idea that Joe Biden has put forward. The second big idea was to put into the Constitution the concept of ethics code for the Supreme Court. That would be a much more radical idea, frankly, than term limits. No other part of the government has within the Constitution a code of ethics that they must abide by. The way to deal with rogue Supreme Court justices or unethical Supreme Court justices is to impeach them. That is the mechanism that our Constitution prescribes. This would be a truly new thing. Now, Joe Biden is right that federal judges, that is to say inferior courts that are created by Congress, that are creatures of statute, not creatures of the Constitution, have these ethical rules, and they are enforceable. You can be asked to resign as a federal judge if you violate these ethical rules. It's pretty radical to treat a co-equal branch of government differently, in that the Supreme Court is at least in theory equal to the executive and equal to the legislature, and neither one of those branches of government has an ethics code embedded in the Constitution. So that idea is a good idea. I'd like our Supreme Court justices to be ethical, but from a comparative government, from a theory point of view, that's a real hit at the Supreme Court's power. That's a real serious attempt to undermine the court's ability to do its job. So I'm really concerned by that idea about embedding an ethical code into the Constitution. I think it is enough that the Supreme Court has written its own ethics code, has adopted it itself, has effectively set the rules for when it's appropriate to impeach one of them. And then if the legislature and the executive believe that an individual justice has behaved badly enough, impeach them. We probably don't use the impeachment power enough in these circumstances. On the term limit idea, I think it's okay. The founders of this country did not expect their Supreme Court justices to serve long terms. The analog for them would have been, kings and princes. An average reigns of kings and princes was significantly less than 18 years in their experience. That's because life expectancies were a lot shorter, and usually by the time you reach the pinnacle of the court or the pinnacle of politics, you're a bit older. And that means you ain't got that long to live. Well, things have changed. Technology has increased life expectancies by more than double from the time of the founders. And so maybe the impact of a lifetime appointment in the mind of the founders is a little different from the impact of a lifetime appointment in modern times. And that's just the reality of how technology has changed. And so maybe it is time for a political reform. Now, Biden was correct. This has to be a constitutional amendment. There is no way that it could be passed by Congress and signed by President and be effective. The only way to do this type of reform is a constitutional amendment. And in that, a constitutional amendment requires it to be passed by Congress, signed by President, and ratified by 3/4 of the It's dead on arrival. But it's an idea. It's almost an ideation. It's almost the sort of thing that many generations from now, when the circumstances are different, somebody might say, that grandpa president, he brought this idea up. I'm gonna revive it. I'm gonna give it another go. And there's precedent for that. The most recent constitutional amendment was first proposed in 1789. It was to say that Congress could not give itself a raise that was effective until the next term. And that constitutional amendment didn't get ratified for 200 years. So maybe Joe's just putting a pin in it. And it's kind of interesting, right? Anyway, if you like that, hit the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe. Leave me a note in the comments down below. Everything you do to interact with this video, including watching it, is going to help others find it and help me, be motivated to keep doing these. All right. I appreciate you. Thanks.